Here is something many people do not want to tell you. Most people know that we do take our sacrifices in order to accumulate wealth, in order to become rich. We sacrifice time for money. We sacrifice today for tomorrow. We save a lot of money and can't spend it today. So obviously there are sacrifices. But the question is, how many sacrifices are worth it? What kind of sacrifices are worth it? What do we actually get for all of those sacrifices? Where does this potentially flip? Because there are some things that are obviously not worth sacrificing. For example, it's not worth sacrificing your health to get money, because in the end, you might end up spending money just to become healthy again. Or it might not be worth it to, say, sacrifice the time with your kids, because at some point your kids grow up and then you can't get that time back. And so then you're rich, but you haven't really experienced life. You haven't really experienced how your kids grew up. So there are a few things that are obviously not worth sacrificing for money, at least if you're already at a certain level. So what do we really get for more and more money? And what can we sacrifice and what can we not sacrifice? Because let's work with the following scenario. Let's say you've already got a very satisfying job. So you don't necessarily have the desire to retire extremely early. You enjoy your job, you do it anyways, even if you don't get paid that much. Or let's say your income is very predictable, it's very stable. Even if you were to lose your job, you're not necessarily that worried. You will find a new job very quickly anyways. You don't need to have a nest egg of, say, 3, 4, 5 years of expenses just to potentially overcome unemployment. So you feel relatively safe, you feel relatively satisfied. Why then save that much money? Let's say you're also not interested in those status games, right? You don't need a fancy car, you don't need a heavy watch, not really interested in comparing yourself with others. And let's say you also don't want to change the world, right? You don't want to spend hundreds of millions potentially supporting a charity that then might do some kind of impact. Not really interested in those kind of things. You might get forgotten in 100 years anyways. So why even do that? So let's say your basic needs are met. Why then accumulate all of that wealth? Why make that trade-off? Why sell so much additional time just to have a higher number in the bank account? Now, there are levels to the game, and most people don't really think about this deeply enough. Most people have a target of a certain net worth. I want to reach $1 million. I want to reach $10 million, maybe even $100 million. That's usually the target. But really, net worth normally does not matter as much compared to cash flow. Now, again, there are levels. When you're very early on, you don't have yet, say, 1 year of expenses saved up, then net worth does matter. But once you're beyond that level, it matters less. Then it's really cash flow that matters. And it's very hard to interchange those two. It's very hard to use net worth in order to get cash flow. For example, if you're invested in the S&P 500, your dividend yield currently is 1.1%. And that dividend yield tended to go down over the decades. It used to be at around 4 to 5%. Now it's at 1.1%. So for every $100 that you've invested, you only get $1.1 after a year. Now, why is this a problem? It's a problem because the inflation rate over all of those decades is above 3%, right? It's 3.1, 3.2%, depending on how you measure this. But the inflation rate is even higher than the dividend yield you're getting on stocks. The same is true for rental yields with property, right? When you have a property, very often you will not be able to cash in what the current inflation rate locally is, and it will not be able to cover the cost for the mortgage, etc. Things look even worse if we look at the monetary debasement. If you look at how many new US dollars get printed every year. On average, USM2 expands by 6.8% per annum. So this is the additional dollars that float around every single year on average, 6.8%. So maybe the official inflation rate of 3.1, 3.2% isn't even that accurate. Maybe the real inflation rate is rather 6.8%. And just because we can become more productive over time, because technology evolves, that's why the official inflation rate for consumer goods is lower than how quickly the monetary base expands. But if you look at that debasement of 6.8% and we compare this to the dividend yield of 1.1, 1.2%, we can see how it's a problem if we just have a lot of net worth to actually live off that net worth and not really lose any purchasing power over the years, right? We can't just deploy our money in property and in the stock market, and then just live off of that without reducing our net worth in terms of purchasing power. It simply doesn't work without our situation getting worse over time. So think about this. Let's say you've got $1 million in the stock market. You get a 1% dividend yield. That's $10,000 per year. That's $800 per month minus taxes. So if you're a millionaire, you're basically getting cash flow of $600-700 per month after taxes, and then you're exposed to the inflation rate. So really, net worth should not be the goal. It should be cash flow after a while. But at the very beginning, net worth does matter, right? If you only have, say, 1 or 2 months of expenses saved up, then you're anxious about everything, right? You're anxious if your boss disagrees with you because you might get fired. You might not find a job very quickly. You might not be able to pay the bills. Every little single repair bill might stress you out. So of course, at the beginning, it's all about just building security. So we want to get peace of mind, and we also want to get freedom, right? We don't necessarily want to take the job that pays the most. Maybe we are okay to take the job that pays a little bit less, but it's way better, where we might learn more, where we might be able to sleep a bit longer, where you might have to do less overtime, where you might have much less stress in general, just for, say, maybe 10 or 20% less pay. We can afford this if we've already got a bit of monetary cushion built up. We cannot afford this if we have to worry about the daily expenses. The same is true for purchases, right? We might be able to then buy the thing that's the best value for money, and not necessarily just the cheapest thing that might break after a few weeks. So there is obviously a certain monetary cushion that we want to have, say 1, maybe 2 years of expenses. But once we go beyond this, it's really not necessarily about net worth anymore, because what matters afterwards, after all of our security concerns are covered, is really what kind of lifestyle can we afford? What kind of expenses long-term can we afford? What's our standard of living? Can we potentially upgrade our apartment to a house? Can we potentially upgrade a very small car to a slightly bigger car to then accommodate for the family? Can we potentially have more children, etc.? Those kind of things then come with cash flow, not necessarily with how much money has already been saved up, because again, net worth does not translate very easily into cash flow. It's extremely expensive to buy cash flow. It's so expensive that even companies that don't produce any meaningful cash flow still are valued very high, right? For example, MicroStrategy, all they're doing is buying Bitcoin. And just because Bitcoin is rare and makes money versus monetary debasement, if we lever that up, that kind of company can still accrue a lot of wealth over time. The reason probably why the returns on all investment assets over the decades are going down is because more and more people have been able to save money and to multiply that money, and less people are productive in the workforce against that, right? So whenever we want to get active purchasing power accumulation with our wealth, somebody has to earn that. And if there's fewer and fewer people that work because of the demographical change, and if there's more and more people that accumulated wealth over time, there's more and more capital concentration, then the returns per unit of capital, of course, have to go down. And that's probably what's happening. So really what we're interested in after having met a certain threshold in net worth, let's say the 2-year mark, is to focus on constant cash flow that is somewhat predictable, that is somewhat stable, that we can grow over time. And that cash flow then determines our expenses. If we are able to live in an area where maybe the air quality is higher, or maybe we are able to spend money on health screenings that otherwise we wouldn't be able to spend, or let's say we are able to pay something for doing certain kind of sports that otherwise we wouldn't be able to afford, then it's only possible without panicking about our money if we've got constantly growing cash flow. And then the trade-off becomes a bit easier again. So in the very early days when we've got nothing, then we can sacrifice a lot, because freedom is very, very important. Not having to stress about very small expenses is extremely important. But then wearing a certain watch, then potentially upping our status, is not necessarily worth it that much anymore. We can then very tangibly think about what's worth more. An additional, say, $1,000 per month in cash flow to then spend this on a nice vacation every quarter, or rather not doing that and taking the time off and spending the time every day or every weekend with the people that we enjoy spending time with. So once we look at the cash flow number, the game becomes much less abstract. Is 1 million net worth enough, or 10 million or 100 million? That's very hard to say. But how much we spend every month and how much we want to increase that spending and how much we want to make in addition to potentially increase that spending, that's much more tangible. Now we've got numbers to play with. But again, we want to do this only once we've reached a certain minimum net worth that we don't have to necessarily stress about the small little things of life. Really, I very much think if you don't want to make investments your main thing in life, that you think about where can I outperform the market, where can I be better than the average market participant. If that's not really your game, then converting net worth into cash flow is pretty much impossible. And it's much better to focus on increasing cash flow. And how can we increase cash flow? It's of course by increasing our skills, by improving ourselves, by doing things that are more value additive, by doing things that will increase our hourly rate, by doing things that potentially lever our knowledge, right? Let's say we are very good at sports. Let's say we go to the gym almost every day and we are now a personal trainer. If we then want to increase our income, we could either just sell more hours, we could train more people, or we could do something with some leverage, right? We could do maybe online sessions, try to sell an online course that can then sell multiple times, where we don't necessarily have to spend more time in order to make more money. So we do inherently some things that have leverage built into them. They might be a bit more competitive, but again, if our skill matches that competitiveness, then we get higher hourlies. And that then turns into higher cash flows. And that then turns into a higher standard of living. And that, I believe, is really the way to go. It's to focus on skills. It's not necessarily to focus on wealth accumulation until we've got our 100 million. Focusing on cash flows also gives us much quicker feedback. Usually it's easier and faster to increase cash flow, say by 20, 30, 40%, than it is to increase net worth at the same rate. Growing net worth is much harder. And so very often what happens is that people become old. They are 50, 60, 70 years old, then they've reached their net worth goal. By that point, they might not be able to enjoy their money that much anymore. And that's a big trap many people fall into. I think it's much better to try to just, every few months, increase cash flow. And it's not just the size of the cash flow, it's of course also the security, the steadiness of the cash flow. And again, the key to that is to become more skilled over time. It's all about learning more. Learning translates directly into higher cash flows. And that's really what makes a career financially stable. If it's the very first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish videos regularly. See you next time on YouTube, or potentially also see you in the premium membership. This is where I share what kind of trades, what kind of investments I do. The link to premium is over here on the screen. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Cheers.